The first time I saw it, I didn't run. I want you to understand that before I tell you anything else. I didn't run because running would have meant accepting what I was seeing, and my mind simply refused. It stood at the edge of the tree line, maybe 60 meters from our camp, and it watched me with eyes that caught the firelight in a way no animal's eyes should. Not the flat, reflective shine of a wolf or something deeper. Something that recognized me as much as I recognized it. I was 34 years old. I had spent 11 years working in remote locations across Siberia, cataloging wildlife for conservation surveys, and I had never once felt the kind of fear that rooted me to that spot. My legs wouldn't move, my throat wouldn't make sound, and the thing just stood there, its chest rising and falling with breath that misted in the cold air. Its head tilted slightly to one side, like it was waiting for me to do something. Like it was curious. I think about that moment every single day. I think about what would have happened if I had screamed, or if I had reached for the rifle that was leaning against the supply crate 3 steps to my left. I think about the fact that it let me see it at all, and what that meant, and whether everything that came after was my fault for not looking away. My name is Dmitry Volkov, and I'm telling you this because I'm the only one left who can. The Sakha Republic in northeastern Siberia is one of the most sparsely populated places on Earth. I don't mean empty in the way a desert is empty, or the way an abandoned building is empty. I mean empty in a way that gets inside your head and stays there. You can walk for days without seeing another human being. You can shout and hear nothing come back but the wind through the larches. The taiga swallows everything, sound, light, time itself. I had grown comfortable with that emptiness over the years. I had learned to find peace in it, even to prefer it to the noise and crowding of the cities where I had grown up. But comfort and understanding are not the same thing. I was comfortable in the taiga. I never understood it. Nobody does. The expedition that brought me to the Verkhoyansk region in the autumn of 2019 was supposed to be routine. A 3-month survey of predator populations in an area that had seen unusual livestock losses over the previous 2 years. Wolves were the obvious suspects. The local Evenki herders had lost nearly 40 reindeer in 18 months, and the Regional Wildlife Authority wanted documentation before they approved a cull. I was sent with a small team, just 3 of us, to set camera traps, collect scat samples, and confirm what everyone already assumed. Wolves. It was always wolves. I had done a dozen surveys just like it, and they always ended the same way. We would find evidence of a pack operating in the area, write a report recommending population management, and move on to the next job. I expected nothing different this time. The team was small because the budget was small. Yuri Antonov was our expedition leader, a biologist 15 years my senior, who had spent most of his career studying apex predators in remote environments. He was quiet and methodical, the kind of man who measured twice and cut once, who never raised his voice even when things went wrong. I respected him more than almost anyone I had ever worked with. He had a way of making you feel like the work mattered, like the data we collected might actually make a difference in a world that mostly didn't care about wolves or reindeer, or the people who lived alongside them. The 3rd member of our team was Elena Morozova, a graduate student from Novosibirsk, who was completing her fieldwork requirement for a master's degree in wildlife ecology. She was young, maybe 25, with the kind of relentless enthusiasm that either burns out fast or hardens into something permanent. I liked her immediately. She reminded me of myself at that age, before the years in the taiga had worn away the softer edges. We established our base camp in early September, when the first hints of winter were already creeping into the air. The site Yuri had chosen was a small clearing near a frozen creek, sheltered from the worst of the wind by a ridge of low hills to the north. It was a good location, close enough to the areas where the livestock losses had occurred to make daily survey work practical, remote enough that we wouldn't be disturbed. We set up our tents, organized our equipment, and spent the first few days getting our bearings, mapping the terrain, identifying game trails, looking for signs of wolf activity. Everything proceeded exactly as expected. The forest was dense and quiet, the weather cold but manageable, the work steady and familiar. I remember the exact moment when things began to change. It was the 5th night, maybe the 6th. I had volunteered for the late watch, which meant staying awake by the fire from midnight until 4 in the morning, while the others slept. We kept watches not because we expected trouble, but because the taiga demands respect. Bears were still active that time of year, not yet settled into their winter dens, and a fire left unattended could die down enough to invite curiosity from things you didn't want curious about you. So I sat by the flames with a thermos of tea and a paperback novel, listening to the sounds of the forest and watching the shadows move at the edge of the light. It was peaceful. I had always loved the night watches. There was something meditative about them, something that made the rest of the world feel very far away. The first thing I noticed was the silence. I don't mean the ordinary silence of a forest at night. I mean the sudden, total absence of sound that happens when every living thing in the area has decided to stop moving at once. The insects went quiet. The small rustlings in the underbrush stopped. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. I'd experienced that kind of silence before, usually when a large predator was moving through the area, and my first thought was bear. I set down my book and reached for the flashlight, sweeping the beam across the tree line in a slow arc. Nothing. Just the black columns of the large trunks and the dense shadows between them. I waited, listening, my heart beating a little faster than it had been a moment before. The silence stretched on. 1 minute, 2. I was about to dismiss it as paranoia when I saw the movement. It was subtle at first, just a shape detaching itself from the darkness between 2 trees, stepping forward into the space where the firelight barely reached. My brain tried to make sense of what I was seeing. A bear standing on its hind legs, a man in a heavy coat, some trick of the light and shadow that was making an ordinary shape look wrong. But none of those explanations fit. The shape was too tall for a bear, too broad for a man, and it moved with a fluidity that belonged to neither. It took another step forward, and the firelight caught its eyes, and I understood that I was looking at something I had no framework to comprehend. It stood perhaps 2.5 meters tall. Its body was covered in coarse, dark fur that looked almost black in the dim light. Its limbs were wrong, arms too long, legs jointed in a way that suggested they could bend in multiple directions. Its hands, if you could call them hands, ended in fingers that were thick and blunt, tipped with claws that curved like hooks. But it was the face that I couldn't look away from, the face that made my mind go blank and my body refuse to move. It was canine, unmistakably canine, with a long muzzle and ears that stood erect atop its skull. But the proportions were wrong. The skull was too large, the brow too heavy, the eyes set too far forward. And those eyes looked at me with something that I can only describe as recognition, not the blank curiosity of an animal encountering something unfamiliar. Recognition, like it knew exactly what I was, like it had been waiting for me to notice it. We stared at each other across the clearing for what felt like hours, but was probably only seconds. I could hear my own breathing, loud and ragged in the silence. I could feel my pulse hammering in my temples. And then, without any warning, the creature turned and walked back into the forest. Not running, not fleeing, just walking, with the casual ease of something that had no reason to fear anything in those woods. It disappeared into the shadows, and the sounds of the forest slowly returned. And I sat there by the dying fire, until the sun came up, unable to move, unable to think, unable to do anything but replay what I had seen over and over again in my mind. I didn't tell the others, not that morning, not for several days afterward. I told myself it was because I didn't want to sound crazy, didn't want to jeopardize the expedition or my professional reputation with stories of monsters in the woods. But that wasn't the real reason. The real reason was that some part of me wasn't sure it had actually happened. The memory felt too sharp, too vivid, like something from a fever dream rather than waking life. I kept expecting it to fade, the way dreams fade, to lose its edges and dissolve into the ordinary forgetting that claims most of our experiences. But it didn't fade. If anything, it grew clearer with each passing day. The image of that face, those eyes, that impossible body standing at the edge of the firelight. It was burned into my mind like a brand. The survey work continued. We found plenty of evidence of wolf activity in the area, tracks, scat, the remains of kills that matched the pattern of pack predation. Yuri was satisfied. Elena was excited, documenting everything with the meticulous care of someone building a career on data. I went through the motions, setting camera traps and collecting samples and recording observations in my field notebook. But my attention was elsewhere. I found myself scanning the tree line constantly, watching the shadows for movement, listening for that terrible silence that had preceded the creature's appearance. I slept poorly, waking at every sound, lying in my tent with my heart racing and my eyes fixed on the thin fabric that was all that separated me from the darkness outside. It was Elena who first noticed something was wrong with me. She found me one afternoon sitting on a fallen log at the edge of the camp, staring into the forest, with my notebook open but empty on my lap. She sat down beside me without saying anything, and we stayed like that for a while, watching the wind move through the branches. Finally, she asked if I was feeling all right. I said I was fine, just tired, and she nodded, but didn't look convinced. She told me that she had noticed me watching the woods a lot lately, that I seemed distracted, that I had been talking less and less as the days went on. I wanted to tell her the truth. I wanted to describe what I had seen and ask if she thought I was losing my mind. But the words wouldn't come. Instead, I told her that the taiga sometimes got to people, that the isolation and the silence could play tricks on your head if you weren't careful. She accepted that explanation, or pretended to, and we went back to work. The second sighting happened 12 days into the expedition. I was checking one of the camera traps we had set along a game trail about 2 kilometers from the base camp. The trap had been triggered several times overnight, and I was reviewing the footage on the small screen built into the unit, scrolling through images of deer and foxes, and one blurry shot of what might have been a wolverine. Standard stuff, nothing unusual. I was about to pack up and move on to the next trap when I heard something moving in the brush behind me. I turned, expecting to see Elena or Yuri coming to check on my progress. Instead, I saw it. It was closer this time, maybe 20 meters away, standing in a patch of dappled sunlight that filtered through the canopy. In the daylight, the details I had missed before became horribly clear. The fur wasn't uniformly dark. It was mottled, with patches of gray and brown that broke up its outline against the forest background. The muscles beneath the fur were dense and clearly defined, bunching and shifting with each breath. The claws I had glimpsed in the firelight were longer than I had realized, easily 10 centimeters, curved like the talons of a raptor. And the face, God, the face. In the daylight, I could see the intelligence in those eyes, the way they tracked my movements with a precision that no animal should possess. There was something almost human in that haze, something that made my skin crawl in a way I had never experienced before. This time, I ran. I don't remember making the decision to run. My body simply moved, turning and crashing through the underbrush toward the camp, with no thought except escape. Branches whipped at my face and tore at my clothes. I stumbled over roots and rocks, nearly falling a dozen times, but I didn't slow down. I didn't look back. I ran into the clearing where our tents were pitched, gasping for breath, my heart slamming against my ribs like it was trying to break free. Yuri was there, sorting through a box of equipment, and he looked up at me with alarm. He asked what had happened, what was wrong, why I looked like I had seen a ghost. And finally, because I couldn't keep it inside any longer, I told him. I told him everything. The words came out in a rush, disjointed and desperate, tumbling over each other in my haste to get them out. The first sighting by, the creature's eyes, the way it had watched me. The second sighting just minutes before, the intelligence in its gaze, the impossible wrongness of its body. I told him that I knew how it sounded, that I knew he probably thought I was having some kind of breakdown, but I swore on everything I had ever believed in that I was telling the truth. I had seen something in those woods, something that wasn't a wolf or a bear or any other animal that belonged in the taiga. Something that shouldn't exist. Yuri listened without interrupting. When I finished, he was quiet for a long moment, his face unreadable. Then he asked me to describe the creature again, slowly this time, with as much detail as I could remember. I did. I described the height, the proportions, the fur, the claws, the face. I described the way it moved and the way it looked at me. When I was done, Yuri nodded slowly, and the expression on his face changed in a way that made my blood run cold. He didn't look skeptical. He didn't look concerned for my mental health. He looked afraid. Yuri told me to sit down. He told me that what he was about to say couldn't leave the three of us, that if he ever got back to the Wildlife Authority or the university, it would end all of our careers. Then he told me about the Antonov hypothesis. His father, Viktor Antonov, had been a geneticist working for a Soviet research institute in the 1970s. The institute's official purpose was agricultural, developing hardier strains of livestock for the harsh Siberian climate. But Viktor had been part of a smaller, classified project that had nothing to do with agriculture. The project was an attempt to understand a series of biological samples that had been recovered from various locations across Siberia over the previous 2 decades. Tissue samples, hair samples. In one case, an entire carcass that had been found frozen in a riverbank near the Lena Delta. The samples all shared certain characteristics that defied easy explanation. They appeared to come from a large canid of some kind, but the cellular structure was wrong. The DNA was wrong. When Viktor and his colleagues sequenced the genome, using primitive techniques that would seem laughable by modern standards, they found something that should have been impossible. The samples contained human DNA, not contamination, not degradation. Genuine human genetic material, integrated into the genome in ways that suggested it had been there for generations, possibly centuries. The creature, whatever it was, appeared to be some kind of hybrid, part canine, part human, with a genetic lineage that branched off from both species at some point in the distant past. Viktor had spent years trying to understand how such a thing could exist. He had developed theories about isolated populations, about convergent evolution, about ancient hybridization events that might have occurred when human ancestors first migrated into Siberia tens of thousands of years ago. But he had never been able to prove any of it. The project was shut down in 1982, the samples were destroyed or lost, and Viktor was reassigned to other work. He never published his findings. He never spoke about them publicly. The only reason Yuri knew any of this was because his father had told him the story on his deathbed, making him promise to keep it secret. Yuri had kept that promise for 15 years. He had never told anyone, never even allowed himself to fully believe it, but he had also never forgotten. And when I described what I had seen in the woods, Every detail matched the descriptions his father had given him of the creature in those old Soviet files. I asked him what it meant. I asked him if he was saying these things were real, that they actually existed, that they were out there in the forest right now, watching us. He said he didn't know. He said his father had believed they were real, had believed they represented something extraordinary and terrifying about the natural world. But Victor had died without ever seeing one himself. The samples had been his only evidence, and the samples were gone. All that remained was the hypothesis, the idea that somewhere in the vast emptiness of Siberia, there existed a species that shared our DNA, but had evolved along a completely different path. A species that had learned to avoid human contact, to stay hidden in the deep wilderness where no one would ever find them. A species that was never meant to be seen. I asked Yuri why they would show themselves to me. Why, after all these years of hiding, would one of them step out of the shadows and let itself be observed? He didn't have an answer. He just looked at me with that fear still flickering in his eyes, and said that maybe I should start asking myself the same question. Elena returned to camp an hour later, and the days after Yuri told me about his father's research were the longest of my life. I couldn't sleep. I couldn't eat. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that face staring back at me from the darkness, those two intelligent eyes reflecting the firelight with something that looked almost like patience. Elena noticed the change in me immediately. She asked Yuri what had happened, why I had come running back to camp like something was chasing me, and Yuri told her I had startled a bear on the trail. She accepted the explanation, but I could tell she didn't fully believe it. She watched me with concern after that, checking in more frequently than necessary, finding excuses to work alongside me instead of letting me go out alone. I should have been grateful for her attention. Instead, it made me feel like a liability, like something fragile that needed to be monitored in case it shattered. Yuri and I didn't speak about what I had seen, not directly, but I caught him watching the tree line the same way I did now, his eyes scanning the shadows with a wariness that hadn't been there before. He started keeping the rifle closer to hand. He suggested we move the camera traps to new locations, farther from the areas where I had encountered the creature, and I understood that he was trying to minimize the chances of another sighting without admitting that he believed one might happen. We were both pretending that everything was normal, while privately preparing for something neither of us could name. The third sighting happened on the 19th day. I was with Elena this time, which made it worse. We were collecting scat samples from a location about 3 kilometers east of camp, working in companionable silence while the afternoon light filtered through the canopy in golden shafts. She was crouched over a promising specimen, carefully transferring it to a collection bag, when I felt the hair on the back of my neck stand up. I knew before I turned around. I knew the way you know when someone is watching you from across a crowded room, that prickling awareness that has nothing to do with sight or sound. I straightened slowly, my hand moving instinctively toward the knife on my belt, and I turned to face the forest. It was there, standing between 2 massive larch trunks, maybe 30 meters away, its body partially obscured by the undergrowth. But this time, it wasn't alone. There were 3 of them. The one I had seen before, I recognized it by a distinctive patch of lighter fur on its chest, stood in the center. Flanking it were 2 others, slightly smaller, their postures subtly different in ways I couldn't quite articulate. One of them had scars across its muzzle, pale lines where the fur had never grown back. The other was darker than the rest, its coat almost pure black, its eyes catching the light with an amber glow that made my stomach turn. They stood in a loose formation, watching us with that same terrible patience I had seen before, and I understood with sudden, horrible clarity that they had been watching us for much longer than I had realized. Days, maybe. Weeks. Following our movements through the forest, observing our routines, learning our patterns. We had thought we were the ones conducting a survey. We had been wrong. Elena hadn't noticed yet. She was still focused on her work, her back to the creatures, humming softly under her breath. I wanted to warn her, but I was afraid that any sudden movement or sound might provoke a reaction. So I stood there, frozen, watching the three figures at the edge of the clearing, and I waited for something to happen. The moment stretched on forever. The largest creature, the one I had seen before, tilted its head slightly, and I could have sworn I saw something like curiosity in its expression. Like it was studying me the same way I was studying it. Like it was trying to understand what I was, and why I was there, and what I might do next. Then Elena stood up and turned around, and she saw them, and she screamed. The sound shattered the stillness like a gunshot. Elena stumbled backward, her collection bag falling from her hands, her face going white with shock. I grabbed her arm and pulled her behind me, putting myself between her and the creatures, my other hand fumbling for the knife that suddenly felt pathetically inadequate. The three figures didn't move. They just watched, their heads turning slightly to track Elena's movement, their eyes never leaving us. I could hear Elena's breathing behind me, fast and ragged, on the edge of hyperventilation. I could feel my own heart hammering against my ribs. And still the creatures didn't move. The largest one took a step forward. I raised the knife, knowing it was useless, knowing that if they decided to attack, there was nothing I could do to stop them. But the creature didn't advance any further. It just stood there, one massive clawed foot planted in front of the other, its eyes locked on mine. And then it did something that I will never forget as long as I live. It raised one of its hands, those terrible hands with their hooked claws and their two long fingers, and it pointed. Not at me, not at Elena, at something behind us, deeper in the forest, in the direction of our base camp. I didn't understand. I didn't know what it was trying to tell me, but before I could react, all three creatures turned and melted back into the shadows, moving with that fluid, impossible grace, and within seconds, they were gone. The forest was silent again. Elena was shaking against my back, her fingers digging into my arm hard enough to leave bruises. I stood there with my knife raised and my legs trembling, and my mind trying desperately to process what had just happened. The creature had pointed toward our camp. It had been trying to tell us something. We ran. We didn't stop until we reached the clearing where our tents were pitched. And when we got there, we found Yuri standing in the middle of the camp with his rifle raised and his face pale as death. He had heard Elena's scream from kilometers away. He had been about to come looking for us. When he saw the expressions on our faces, he didn't ask what had happened. He just lowered the rifle and said that we needed to talk. That night, huddled around the fire, with the darkness pressing in from all sides, I told Elena everything. The first two sightings, Yuri's father and the Soviet research project, the Antonov hypothesis, the DNA that shouldn't exist. She listened without interrupting, her face cycling through disbelief and fear, and something that looked almost like wonder. When I finished, she was quiet for a long time. Then she asked the question that had been gnawing at me since the creatures had disappeared into the forest. Why did it point toward the camp? I didn't have an answer. Neither did Yuri. We sat there in the flickering firelight, three scientists confronted with something that defied everything we thought we knew about the world, and we tried to make sense of the senseless. Elena suggested that maybe the creature had been warning us about something. Maybe there was a threat near the camp that we hadn't noticed. Maybe they were trying to protect us. Yuri dismissed the idea immediately. These things weren't protectors, he said. They were predators. His father's notes had described the violence they were capable of, the remains that had been found at sites where they had been active. Whatever they wanted from us, it wasn't our safety. But I wasn't so sure. The creature had had every opportunity to attack me during that first sighting. It had been close enough to reach me before I could have reacted, and it had simply watched. The same was true of the second encounter, and the third. If they wanted to hurt us, why hadn't they? What were they waiting for? The answer came 3 days later, and it destroyed everything. We had decided to stay. It sounds insane now, but at the time it felt like the only choice that made sense. We were scientists. We had stumbled onto something unprecedented, something that could rewrite our understanding of evolution and biology and the history of our species. How could we walk away from that? Yuri argued that we needed to document what we had seen, to gather evidence that could support his father's hypothesis, and finally bring the truth to light. Elena, despite her fear, was driven by the same curiosity that had brought her to the taiga in the first place. And I was driven by something I couldn't name, a compulsion that went beyond scientific interest. I needed to understand what these creatures were. I needed to know why they had revealed themselves to me. We started approaching the situation like researchers instead of prey. We set up additional camera traps in the areas where I had seen the creatures, using motion sensors and infrared triggers to capture footage without requiring our presence. We began keeping detailed logs of every sound and movement in the forest, looking for patterns that might indicate when and where the creatures were active. We worked in pairs at all times, never letting anyone venture into the woods alone. And slowly, over the course of several days, we began to accumulate data. The camera traps captured them twice. The images were grainy and poorly lit, but they were unmistakably real. In one, a single creature was visible at the edge of the frame, its body half turned away from the camera, its head swiveled back to look directly at the lens. In the other, 2 of them were moving through the undergrowth in single file, their forms blurred by motion, but still recognizable. Elena spent hours analyzing the images, measuring proportions and estimating heights, and comparing the creature's anatomy to known species. Her conclusions matched what Yuri's father had theorized decades before. These things were unlike anything in the biological record. They shared characteristics with both canids and primates, but they belonged to neither category. They were something else entirely, something new, or perhaps something very, very old. Yuri became obsessed with the idea of collecting a physical sample: hair, blood, tissue, anything that could be analyzed in a proper laboratory and compared to his father's original findings. He started setting snares along the game trails where the creatures had been spotted, using techniques he had learned for capturing wolves, but modified to account for the creature's greater size and apparent intelligence. I told him it was dangerous. I told him that we didn't know how they would react to being trapped, that we might be provoking something we couldn't control. He dismissed my concerns. We were so close, he said. After all these years, after everything his father had sacrificed, we were finally close to proving that the hypothesis was real. The snare was triggered on the 26th night. We heard it from the camp, a sound like nothing I had ever heard before. Not a howl, not a scream, but something in between. A vocalization that started low and rose to a pitch that made my teeth ache, that seemed to vibrate in my chest and my skull and my bones. It went on for maybe 10 seconds, then stopped abruptly, leaving a silence that felt heavier than before. Yuri grabbed his rifle and a flashlight and headed toward the sound before I could stop him. Elena and I followed, because the alternative was staying alone in the camp while that terrible cry echoed in our memories. We found the snare about half a kilometer from camp, in a shallow ravine where Yuri had identified heavy creature traffic. The creature caught in it was the smallest of the 3 I had seen, the dark one with the black coat and the amber eyes. The snare had closed around its leg just above the ankle, and it had clearly been struggling to free itself. The cable was slick with blood. The creature's fur was matted and torn where it had bitten at the restraint. But it wasn't struggling now. It was lying on its side in the leaf litter, its chest heaving with labored breath, its eyes fixed on us as we approached. Those eyes. I will never forget those eyes. They weren't the eyes of a trapped animal. There was no panic in them, no mindless terror. There was pain and exhaustion. But beneath that, there was something else. Something that looked almost like resignation, like it had known this was coming, like it had been waiting for this moment, the way you wait for a storm you can see building on the horizon. Yuri raised his rifle. He said we needed to put it down, that a wounded animal was dangerous, that we could collect our samples after it was dead. I heard Elena make a sound of protest behind me. I heard my own voice saying no, saying we couldn't, saying there had to be another way. But Yuri wasn't listening. His finger was on the trigger. His eyes were fixed on the creature with an intensity that frightened me, almost as much as the creature itself. Then the forest exploded. They came from everywhere at once. From the trees, from the undergrowth, from the shadows that had seemed empty moments before. I caught glimpses of them in the beam of the flashlight, dark shapes moving with impossible speed, closing the distance between us in heartbeats. Yuri fired once, twice, the rifle shots deafening in the enclosed space of the ravine. I heard Elena scream. I felt something strike me from behind, a blow that drove the air from my lungs and sent me sprawling face first into the dirt. And then there was only chaos. I don't know how long it lasted. Seconds, maybe. Minutes. Time lost all meaning in that maelstrom of violence and terror. I remember the sound of Yuri's rifle firing again and again until the magazine was empty. I remember Elena's screams cutting off with a horrible abruptness. I remember the smell of blood and fear and something else, something musky and wild that I had never encountered before. And I remember the moment when everything went still, when the chaos ended as suddenly as it had begun, and I found myself lying in the darkness with my face pressed against the cold earth and my body refusing to move. When I finally managed to lift my head, the first thing I saw was Yuri. He was lying on his back a few meters away, his rifle still clutched in his hands, his eyes open and staring at nothing. His throat had been torn out. The wound was massive, ragged, the work of claws or teeth, or both. Blood had pooled beneath him, black in the dim light, soaking into the forest floor. He was dead. I knew it without having to check. No one could survive a wound like that. No one could lose that much blood and keep breathing. I looked for Elena. I called her name, my voice cracking, my throat raw from screaming I didn't remember doing. There was no answer. I crawled through the underbrush, searching, my hands slipping in the blood and the mud, my eyes straining against the darkness. I found her jacket first, torn and discarded near the base of a tree. Then her flashlight, still on, lying in a patch of crushed ferns. But I didn't find her. I searched for what felt like hours, calling her name until my voice gave out, and I never found her. The creature in the snare was gone, too. The cable had been severed cleanly, cut by something sharp, and there was a trail of blood leading away into the forest. They had come for their own. They had come to rescue the one we had trapped, and they had killed Yuri and taken Elena, and they had left me alive. They had left me alive. I still don't know why. I made it back to camp somehow. I don't remember the walk. I don't remember anything between finding Yuri's body and waking up in my tent the next morning, with the sun streaming through the fabric and the birds singing in the trees like nothing had happened. For a moment, I thought it had all been a nightmare. Then I looked down and saw the blood on my hands, the dirt under my fingernails, the bruises blooming across my arms and chest. It was real. All of it was real. I should have left immediately. I should have packed what I could carry and walked out of that forest, and never looked back. But I couldn't. Elena was still out there somewhere. Maybe she was dead, but maybe she wasn't. Maybe they had taken her for a reason. Maybe there was still a chance to find her, to bring her home, to make some sense of the senseless violence that had torn our expedition apart. So I stayed. I stayed, and I searched, and I waited for something to happen. The days blurred together after that. I lost track of time, lost track of myself. I would wake up in the morning and walk into the forest, following trails that led nowhere, calling Elena's name into the silence. I would return to camp at night and sit by the fire, staring into the flames, listening for sounds that never came. I stopped eating regularly. I stopped sleeping. I stopped doing anything that resembled the work we had come here to do. The camera traps kept running, capturing images of deer and foxes, and occasionally, in the distance, shapes that might have been the creatures, or might have been nothing at all. I reviewed the footage obsessively, looking for any sign of Elena, any indication that she was still alive. I never found one. On the 34th day, I found the cave. I had wandered farther from camp than usual, following a game trail that wound up into the hills north of our base. The terrain grew rockier as I climbed, the trees thinning out to reveal outcroppings of gray stone that jutted from the earth like broken teeth. I was about to turn back when I noticed an opening in the rock face ahead, a dark gap barely wide enough for a person to squeeze through, partially hidden by a curtain of hanging moss. Something about it drew me forward, some instinct I couldn't explain. I pushed aside the moss and stepped into the darkness. The cave opened up almost immediately into a larger chamber, maybe 10 meters across and high enough to stand upright. The walls were rough and uneven, marked with striations that suggested water had carved this space over thousands of years. But it wasn't the geology that made me stop in my tracks. It was what I saw on the walls. Drawings, dozens of them, hundreds maybe, covering every surface I could see, rendered in pigments that had faded with age, but were still clearly visible. Some showed animals I recognized: deer, bears, wolves, mammoths. Others showed humans, stick figures engaged in hunting and gathering and rituals I couldn't identify. But most of them showed something else, something that made my legs go weak and my vision blur at the edges. They showed the creatures. The drawings were crude but unmistakable, tall figures with elongated limbs and canine heads, standing upright like men, their claws extended, their eyes rendered as simple circles that somehow conveyed the same terrible intelligence I had seen in the forest. Some of the images showed them alone, moving through landscapes of trees and mountains. Others showed them alongside humans, the two species standing together in poses that suggested interaction rather than conflict. In one panel that stretched across nearly 2 meters of rock, a group of humans appeared to be offering something to a circle of the creatures, food, perhaps, or some kind of tribute. The creatures stood with their heads bowed, their postures almost reverent, like they were accepting a gift, like they were part of some ancient covenant that had been forgotten by everyone except the people who made these marks on the stone. I don't know how long I stood there, staring at those images, trying to comprehend what they meant. The implications were staggering. These creatures weren't some recent mutation or isolated population that had escaped scientific notice. They had been here for thousands of years, maybe tens of thousands, living alongside our ancestors in a relationship that had apparently been peaceful enough to commemorate in art. The Antonov hypothesis had been right about the DNA, but it had missed the larger picture. These things weren't accidents of evolution. They were part of our history, part of our story as a species. And somehow, over the millennia, we had forgotten them completely. I took photographs of everything, dozens of them, hundreds, my hands shaking so badly that half the images came out blurred. I didn't care. I needed evidence. I needed proof that what I was seeing was real, that it wasn't some hallucination conjured by grief and exhaustion and the endless pressure of the forest pressing in from all sides. When my camera's memory card was full, I sat down on the cold stone floor, and I wept. I wept for Yuri, who had died trying to prove his father's theories. I wept for Elena, who was gone and probably dead, and whose body I would never find. I wept for myself, for the person I had been before I came to this place, for the certainty and sanity that had been stripped away piece by piece, until nothing remained but this hollow shell sitting in a cave full of ancient secrets. When the tears finally stopped, I became aware that I was not alone. The sound was subtle at first, a soft scraping, like claws on stone, coming from somewhere deeper in the cave. I froze, my breath catching in my throat, my hand moving instinctively toward the knife on my belt. The scraping grew louder, closer, accompanied now by the sound of breathing, deep, rhythmic, unmistakably animal. I turned slowly, my eyes straining against the darkness, and I saw a shape emerging from a passage I hadn't noticed before, a passage that led deeper into the earth, into chambers I couldn't see, into a darkness that seemed to swallow the beam of my flashlight before it could penetrate more than a few meters. The creature that emerged was the largest I had seen, larger than the one that had watched me by the fire, larger than any of the three that had appeared in the forest clearing. It had to duck to fit through the passage entrance, its massive shoulders scraping against the stone on either side. Its fur was gray, shot through with white around the muzzle and ears, and I understood with sudden clarity that I was looking at something old. Not just old in years, but old in a deeper sense. Ancient in the way that mountains are ancient, in the way that rivers are ancient. This creature had been alive when my grandparents were children, maybe longer, maybe much, much longer. It stopped a few meters away from me and lowered itself into a crouch, bringing its eyes level with mine. I could smell it now, that musky wild scent I remembered from the night of the attack, mixed with something else, something earthier and older. Its breath misted in the cold air of the cave. Its claws clicked softly against the stone floor. And its eyes, those terrible, knowing eyes, looked at me with an expression I couldn't read. I should have been terrified. I should have been running, screaming, fighting for my life with every ounce of strength I had left. But I wasn't. Something about this creature's presence was different from the others. There was no threat in its posture, no predatory tension in its muscles. It simply sat there, watching me, waiting for something I didn't understand. Then it spoke. I don't mean it made sounds that resembled speech. I don't mean it communicated through gestures or expressions that I interpreted as language. I mean it opened its mouth and it spoke, in a voice that was rough and strange and barely recognizable as human, but was undeniably, impossibly, forming words. "You came back," it said. The words hit me like a physical blow. My mind reeled, trying to process what I was hearing, trying to reconcile the impossible with the evidence of my own senses. The creature's mouth wasn't shaped for human speech. The muzzle was too long, the tongue too thick, the vocal cords configured for howls and growls rather than words. But it was speaking. It was speaking to me in Russian, in a dialect that sounded old and formal, like something from a previous century. I tried to respond, but my voice wouldn't work. My throat had closed up. My tongue felt thick and useless in my mouth. The creature tilted its head, that familiar gesture of curiosity, and something that might have been amusement flickered in its eyes. "They said you would," it continued. "The young ones. They watched you. They said you were different from the others, that you saw us and did not run, that you looked at us the way we look at you." I finally managed to force words out, my voice cracking and weak. "Elena," I said. "The woman who was with me. Where is she? Is she alive?" The creature was silent for a long moment. Its eyes never left mine, but something in its expression shifted, became heavier, more solemn. "She lives," it said. "She is with us now. She cannot leave." "Why?" The word came out as a desperate croak. "Why can't she leave? What do you want with her?" The creature rose from its crouch, and I had to tilt my head back to keep looking at its face. It was so tall, so impossibly tall, its head nearly brushing the ceiling of the cave. It turned and gestured toward the drawings on the walls, sweeping one massive arm across the panorama of ancient images. "Long ago," it said, "we lived together, your kind and ours. We shared the forests and the mountains and the rivers. We hunted together. We protected each other. There was balance." It turned back to face me, and I saw something in its eyes that I hadn't expected. Sadness. A deep, ancient sadness that seemed to go back further than I could comprehend. "Then your kind grew numerous. You spread across the land like fire. You forgot the old ways. You forgot us. And we retreated. We hid ourselves in the deep places, the forgotten places, where your kind does not go. We watched from the shadows as you built your cities and your machines and your weapons. We watched as you forgot that we had ever existed." The creature took a step closer, and I forced myself not to flinch. "But we did not forget you. We could not. Your blood runs in our veins, as ours runs in yours. We are bound together, your kind and ours, in ways that cannot be severed. And sometimes, when the balance tips too far, when the forgetting becomes too complete, we must remind you." I didn't understand. I told the creature that I didn't understand, that I needed it to explain what it meant, what any of this had to do with Elena or Yuri, or the expedition that had brought us to this place. The creature made a sound that might have been a sigh, a low, rumbling exhalation that echoed off the cave walls. "The man with the weapon," it said. "He tried to take one of our young. He would have killed her. We could not allow that." "Yuri," I said. "His name was Yuri. He was a scientist. He just wanted to understand what you are." Understanding is not what he sought. The creature's voice hardened. He sought proof, evidence, things to show to others of your kind, things that would bring more of you here, with more weapons, more traps, more desire to capture and study and control. We have seen it before. We know what happens when your kind decides that something must be understood. I wanted to argue, to defend Yuri and his intentions, but I couldn't. The creature was right. Yuri had been obsessed with proving his father's hypothesis, with bringing evidence back to the scientific community, with exposing these creatures to the scrutiny of the modern world. He had never stopped to consider what that exposure might mean for them. Neither had I. "And Elena?" I asked. "Why did you take her? She never hurt anyone. She never tried to trap or capture any of you." The creature was quiet for a long time before it answered. "She carries something," it said finally. "Something that belongs to both our kinds. Something that has not existed for many generations." I didn't understand what it meant. I asked it to explain, but it only shook its massive head. "You will see," it said, "if you choose to stay, if you choose to understand." It turned and began moving back toward the passage from which it had emerged. I called after it, asking where it was going, asking what I was supposed to do, asking a dozen questions that tumbled out in a desperate rush. The creature paused at the entrance to the passage and looked back at me over its shoulder. "You came back," it said again. "That is why you still live. The young ones wanted to kill you with the others. I told them to wait. I told them you were different." "Different how?" I asked. The creature's eyes met mine, and for a moment I felt something pass between us. Not communication exactly, but recognition. The same recognition I had felt during that first encounter by the fire, when the creature had looked at me, and I had looked at it, and something had shifted in the fabric of reality. "You see us," it said, "truly see us. Not as monsters or specimens or threats to be eliminated. You see us as we are. That is rare among your kind. That is precious." It turned away and disappeared into the darkness of the passage, leaving me alone in the cave with the ancient drawings and the weight of everything I had learned pressing down on my shoulders like a physical burden. I don't know how long I sat there before I made my decision. Hours, maybe. The light outside the cave entrance shifted from afternoon gold to evening gray, to the deep blue of twilight. I thought about Elena, alive somewhere in the depths of this mountain, carrying something that the creature had said belonged to both our kinds. I thought about Yuri, dead in the forest, his throat torn out because he had tried to take something that wasn't his to take. I thought about the drawings on the walls, the evidence of a relationship between our species that stretched back to the dawn of human history. And I thought about the creature's words. "You see us, truly see us." Maybe that was why I had been spared. Maybe that was why the creatures had let me live when they had killed Yuri and taken Elena. Because I had looked at them without the lens of fear or scientific detachment or the desire to capture and control. Because I had seen them as beings rather than specimens. Because some part of me, some deep instinctive part that predated language and reason and civilization, had recognized them as kin. I made my decision. I gathered my camera and my flashlight, and what little courage I had left, and I followed the creature into the darkness. The passage wound downward for what felt like kilometers, twisting and turning through the rock in ways that seemed almost deliberate, almost designed. The walls were smooth in places, worn by the passage of countless bodies over countless years. The air grew warmer as I descended, thick with moisture and that musky animal scent that I had come to associate with the creatures. I could hear sounds echoing up from below, voices, movement, the distant drip of water on stone. I kept walking, one hand trailing along the wall for balance, my flashlight beam cutting a narrow path through the absolute darkness. The passage opened suddenly into a vast chamber, and I stopped in my tracks, my breath catching in my throat. It was enormous, bigger than any natural cave I had ever seen, bigger than seemed possible given the size of the hills above. The ceiling arched overhead like the vault of a cathedral, lost in shadows that my flashlight couldn't penetrate. The floor was covered with soft material, moss perhaps, or some kind of lichen that grew in the absence of light. And everywhere I looked, there were creatures, dozens of them, maybe hundreds. They filled the chamber like a congregation, sitting and standing and moving through the space in patterns I couldn't follow. Some were massive, as large as the elder I had spoken with in the upper cave. Others were smaller, younger, with fur that was still dark, and eyes that were still bright with the curiosity of youth. A few were tiny, infants cradled in the arms of adults, their small bodies covered in downy fur that looked almost soft enough to touch. They all turned to look at me as I entered, hundreds of eyes, reflecting the beam of my flashlight, watching me with expressions I couldn't read. The silence was absolute. I stood at the entrance to the chamber, my legs trembling, my heart pounding, waiting for something to happen. The elder emerged from the crowd and approached me. It moved slowly, deliberately, giving me time to adjust to its presence. When it reached me, it extended one massive hand, palm up, in a gesture that was unmistakably an invitation. "Come," it said. "She is waiting for you." I took the creature's hand. Its skin was rough, covered with calluses and scars, but its grip was gentle. It led me through the crowd, and the other creatures parted to let us pass, their eyes following our progress across the chamber. I could feel their attention like a physical weight, pressing in from all sides, but there was no hostility in it, only curiosity, only that same sense of recognition I had felt before. We reached the far side of the chamber, where a smaller passage led into another space. The elder released my hand and gestured for me to continue alone. I hesitated, looking back at the crowd of creatures, at the vast, impossible space they inhabited, at the world I had stumbled into without understanding anything about it. "Go," the elder said. "She needs to see you. She needs to know that she is not forgotten." I turned and walked into the passage. Elena was waiting for me in a small chamber at the end. She was sitting on a bed of moss and soft materials, her back against the stone wall, her hands resting on her stomach. She looked up as I entered, and for a moment her face was blank, unrecognizing. Then something shifted in her eyes, and she smiled. "Dmitri," she said, "you came." I crossed the chamber in 3 steps and dropped to my knees beside her. I took her hands in mine, searching her face for signs of injury or illness, or the trauma of captivity. She looked tired, thinner than I remembered, but otherwise unharmed. Her eyes were clear. Her grip was strong. "Are you all right?" I asked. "Did they hurt you? What happened? I've been searching for you for weeks. I thought you were dead. I thought—" She squeezed my hands, cutting off my flood of questions. "I'm all right," she said. "They've been taking care of me, feeding me, keeping me warm. They're not what we thought, Dmitri. They're not monsters." "I know," I said. "I've been talking to one of them, the elder. It told me about the history between our species, the drawings in the cave, the covenant that was broken." Elena nodded slowly. "They told me too. They told me everything, about who they are, where they came from, why they've stayed hidden for so long." She paused, and something flickered across her face. Fear, maybe, or wonder, or some combination of the two. "They told me why they took me." I remembered what the elder had said. "She carries something, something that belongs to both our kinds." "Elena," I said carefully, "what did they mean? What are you carrying?" She was quiet for a long moment. Her hands moved to her stomach, resting there in a gesture that was protective, almost unconscious. When she looked up at me, her eyes were bright with tears. "I didn't know," she said. "Before the expedition. I didn't know. It was too early to tell, and I wasn't paying attention to the signs. And by the time I realized what was happening, we were already here, already deep in the forest, and I didn't know how to tell anyone." My mind was racing, trying to understand what she was saying, trying to fit the pieces together into a picture that made sense. "Elena," I said, "are you saying, 'I'm pregnant, Dmitri'?" The words came out in a rush, tumbling over each other. "I'm pregnant, and they knew. They knew before I did. They could smell it on me, or sense it somehow, and that's why they took me. That's why they've been keeping me here." I stared at her, my mind blank, my thoughts scattered like leaves in a wind. "But why?" I finally managed. "Why would they care about that? What does your pregnancy have to do with them?" Elena's hands pressed harder against her stomach. Her eyes met mine, and I saw something in them that I didn't understand, something that looked almost like awe. "The father," she said quietly. "Before the expedition, there was someone, a man I met in Novosibirsk, at the university. We were together for a few months before I left for the field work. I thought it was nothing serious. I thought—" She stopped, took a breath, steadied herself. "He was strange, Dmitri, different from anyone I had ever known. He kept odd hours, disappeared for days at a time without explanation. He had scars on his body that he wouldn't talk about. And his eyes. Sometimes, in certain light, his eyes looked She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't have to. The realization hit me like a blow to the chest. I pulled back, staring at her, my mind refusing to accept what she was implying. It wasn't possible. It couldn't be possible. The creatures I had seen in the forest were animals, no matter how intelligent, no matter how ancient. They weren't human. They couldn't pass as human. They couldn't walk into a university and seduce a graduate student and father a child. But even as I rejected the idea, another part of my mind was putting pieces together. The Antonov hypothesis, the shared DNA, the drawings in the cave showing humans and creatures standing together, interacting, participating in rituals that suggested something deeper than mere coexistence. The elder's words echoed in my memory. Your blood runs in our veins, as ours runs in yours. We are bound together, your kind and ours, in ways that cannot be severed. That's impossible, I said, but my voice lacked conviction. Elena shook her head slowly. I thought so too. When they first told me, I thought they were lying, or confused, or that I had misunderstood somehow. But they showed me things, Dmitri. They showed me their history. Not just the drawings in the caves, but other things, older things, memories passed down through generations. They remember a time when the boundary between our kinds was not so firm, when there were those who walked in both worlds, who could wear either shape, who served as bridges between the forest and the village. Shapeshifters, I said. The word felt absurd on my tongue, like something from a fairy tale. They don't call it that. They call it the old way. The way things were before the forgetting, before your kind, our kind, decided that the world had to be one thing or another, human or animal, civilized or wild. They say the old way still exists in some of them. The ability to change, to adapt, to move between forms. It's rare now, rarer than it used to be, but it hasn't disappeared entirely. I thought about the man she had described. The strange hours, the unexplained absences, the scars, the eyes that looked wrong in certain light. I thought about how easy it would be for a with human-level intelligence to learn human behavior, to mimic human speech and mannerisms, to walk among us undetected. They had been hiding in the deep forests for thousands of years, watching us, studying us. Why wouldn't some of them have learned to pass? The child, I said. What do they want with the child? Elena's hands moved across her stomach again, that protective gesture I had noticed before. They say the child is special, a bridge, like the ones from the old stories, someone who belongs to both worlds, who carries the blood of both peoples. They say children like this haven't been born in generations, maybe centuries. They say... Her voice broke. She pressed her lips together, fighting for control, and when she spoke again, her voice was barely a whisper. They say the child might be able to heal the breach, to restore the connection that was lost when your kind forgot us. They want to raise it here, among them, to teach it the old ways. They want to use it to bring our peoples back together. And what do you want? I asked. The question hung in the air between us. Elena looked at me with eyes that were red-rimmed and exhausted, and I saw the weight of everything she had been carrying, the fear, the confusion, the impossible choice that had been thrust upon her without warning or consent. I don't know, she said. I don't know what I want. A month ago I was a graduate student worried about finishing my thesis. Now I'm carrying a child that might not be entirely human, being held by creatures that shouldn't exist, being told that my baby is the key to some ancient prophecy that I never asked to be part of. How am I supposed to know what I want? I had no answer for her. I had no answers for anything. I sat beside her in that small stone chamber, deep beneath the earth, surrounded by beings that defied everything I thought I knew about the world, and I felt more lost than I had ever felt in my life. We stayed like that for a long time, not speaking, just existing together in the silence. Eventually, Elena's breathing slowed, and her head drooped against my shoulder, and I realized she had fallen asleep. I sat there holding her, watching the shadows flicker on the walls, listening to the distant sounds of the creatures moving through their underground world. I must have slept too, because when I opened my eyes, the chamber had changed. There was light now, soft and diffuse, coming from somewhere I couldn't identify. And there was someone else in the room with us. The elder sat cross-legged on the floor a few meters away, watching us with those ancient, knowing eyes. It had brought food, roots and berries and strips of dried meat arranged on a flat stone. It had brought water in a clay vessel that looked handmade, rough and uneven, but functional. And it had brought something else, something that made my breath catch when I saw it. Yuri's notebook. The elder saw me looking at it and picked it up, turning it over in its massive hands. "The man who died," it said. "He wrote many things. About us, about his father, about the questions he hoped to answer. We found it in your camp after the attack." I reached for the notebook, and the elder handed it to me without resistance. The leather cover was stained with something dark, blood, probably Yuri's blood, but the pages inside were intact. I flipped through them, scanning Yuri's cramped handwriting, his diagrams and observations and theories. Near the end, I found something that made me stop. It was a drawing, not one of Yuri's usual technical sketches, but something more personal, more emotional. It showed two figures standing side by side, one human, one creature, their hands clasped together, their faces turned toward each other. Beneath the drawing, Yuri had written a single sentence in Russian. "Perhaps we were never meant to be separate." I stared at those words for a long time. I thought about Yuri, about his obsession with proving his father's hypothesis, about the way that obsession had blinded him to everything else. He had wanted evidence. He had wanted proof. He had wanted to expose these creatures to the scrutiny of science, to drag them into the light of modern understanding. But somewhere beneath all that, somewhere in the part of himself he rarely showed to others, he had understood something deeper. He had understood that the connection between our species wasn't just genetic, wasn't just historical. It was something more fundamental, something that couldn't be captured in samples or photographs or academic papers. We were never meant to be separate. I closed the notebook and looked up at the elder. "What happens now?" I asked. The creature was silent for a moment, considering the question. "That depends on you," it said finally. "You have seen us. You have learned our secrets. You have been welcomed into our home. These are things we do not offer lightly, and they come with responsibilities." "What kind of responsibilities?" "You must choose," the elder said. "You can leave this place and return to your world, carrying what you have learned. You can tell others about us, show them your photographs and your evidence, try to convince them that we exist. Some will believe you, most will not. But word will spread, and eventually others will come looking. Scientists, hunters, soldiers, people who want to study us, or capture us, or destroy us. The forgetting will end, but what replaces it may be worse." I thought about what that would mean. Expeditions flooding into the taiga, armed with tranquilizer guns and specimen containers. Creatures hunted down and dragged into laboratories, dissected and analyzed and catalogued. The last remnants of an ancient people, exterminated in the name of progress. Their bones displayed in museums, their DNA sequenced and published in academic journals. "Or," I asked. "Or you can stay," the elder said. "You can become one of us, in the way that your ancestors once were. You can learn the old ways, help us raise the child that your friend carries, serve as a bridge between our peoples. It will not be easy. You will have to give up everything you knew before. your career, your family, your place in the human world. But you will gain something in return, a purpose, a belonging, a chance to be part of something larger than yourself. I looked at Elena, still sleeping against my shoulder. I looked at the notebook in my hands, at Yuri's drawing and his final prophetic words. I looked at the elder, this ancient being who had watched civilizations rise and fall, who had seen my species spread across the earth like fire, who had chosen to hide rather than fight, and to wait rather than act. "How long do I have to decide?" I asked. "The child will be born in the spring," the elder said. "Before then, you must choose. If you decide to leave, we will guide you back to the human world, and you will never see us again. If you decide to stay, we will teach you everything we know. But you cannot do both. You cannot carry our secrets into the world and remain part of our family. The risk is too great." I nodded slowly, understanding the weight of what was being asked of me. "I need time," I said. "I need to think." The elder rose to its feet, towering over me in the dim light of the chamber. "Time is the one thing we have in abundance," it said. "Take what you need. But remember, the child will not wait forever, and neither will we." It turned and left the chamber, its footsteps fading into the darkness of the passage beyond. I sat there with Elena sleeping beside me, and Yuri's notebook in my hands, and the weight of an impossible choice pressing down on my shoulders. The days that followed were unlike anything I had experienced before. I was allowed to move freely through the underground complex, exploring chambers and passages that seemed to go on forever. The creatures watched me, but didn't interfere, answering my questions when I asked them, leaving me alone when I needed solitude. I learned things about them that I never could have imagined. I learned that they had their own language, a complex system of vocalizations and gestures that could convey subtleties beyond anything human speech could manage. I learned that they had art and music and stories, traditions passed down through generations, a culture as rich and deep as any human civilization. I learned that they mourned their dead and celebrated their births and fell in love and raised families and grew old and wise and eventually returned to the earth that had made them. They were not monsters. They were not animals. They were people, different from us in form, but not in essence, carrying the same hopes and fears and dreams that had driven humanity since the beginning of our existence. And they were dying. The elder told me this on the 5th day, when I had earned enough trust to be shown the deeper chambers where the oldest members of the tribe resided. There were fewer of them than there should have been, the elder explained. Fewer births each generation, more deaths, a slow decline that had been accelerating over the past century. The forgetting had hurt them in ways that went beyond mere isolation. Without contact with humans, without the exchange of blood and culture that had sustained them for millennia, they were fading. The old ways were being lost. The ability to change forms, once common, was now vanishingly rare. Within a few more generations, there might be nothing left of them but bones and memories. "The child your friend carries is our hope," the elder said. "A new bridge, a new connection, a chance to reverse the decline before it becomes irreversible. That is why we took her. That is why we have protected her. That is why we are asking you to stay." I understood then why they had let me live. It wasn't mercy or curiosity or recognition of some special quality in me. It was desperation. They needed someone to help them, someone who could move between worlds, someone who could ensure that the child was raised with knowledge of both peoples. They needed me because they were running out of options. Elena woke on the 6th day, stronger than she had been, more certain of herself. She told me that she had made her decision. She was going to stay. She was going to raise her child among the creatures, teach it about both its heritages, help it become the bridge that both peoples needed. She asked me to stay with her. She said she couldn't do it alone. I told her I needed more time. On the 7th day, I climbed back up to the surface. The creatures didn't stop me. They watched me go with those knowing eyes, and I felt their attention following me as I made my way through the passages and out into the cold gray light of the Siberian afternoon. The forest was exactly as I had left it, silent, vast, indifferent to the dramas playing out beneath its canopy. I walked back to the camp where Yuri had died and Elena had been taken, and my old life had ended. The tents were still there, collapsed and weathered but recognizable. The equipment was scattered and rusted. The fire pit was cold. I sat down on a fallen log, and I looked at the forest, and I thought about everything that had happened. I thought about Yuri, dead because he couldn't see past his obsession. I thought about Elena, choosing a life that most people would consider madness. I thought about the creatures, ancient and dying, reaching out across the gulf of millennia for a connection they had lost. I thought about myself, a man who had spent his whole life studying the natural world without ever really understanding it, who had walked through forests and mountains and tundra without ever seeing what was hidden in the shadows. I thought about the choice I had to make. Leave and return to a world that would never believe me. Spend the rest of my life knowing what I knew, carrying secrets I could never share, watching from a distance as the last remnants of an ancient people faded into extinction. Or stay and become part of something larger than myself. Give up everything I had known, everything I had been, and dedicate whatever years I had left to helping two peoples find their way back to each other. It wasn't really a choice at all. I stood up from the log, and I turned my back on the camp, and I walked into the forest. The trees closed around me like a curtain, and the light faded, and the sounds of the human world grew distant and then disappeared entirely. I walked until I found the cave entrance, hidden behind its curtain of moss, and I pushed through and descended into the darkness. The elder was waiting for me at the bottom. "You have decided," it said, not a question. "I have decided," I said. The creature nodded slowly, and something that might have been relief flickered across its ancient face. "Then welcome," it said. "Welcome to the family you never knew you had." It turned and led me deeper into the earth, and I followed, leaving behind everything I had been and walking toward everything I might become. That was 3 years ago. I am recording this account because I believe the world needs to know what I have learned, even if the world is not ready to hear it. I am recording it because Elena's child was born 6 months after I made my decision, a beautiful girl with her mother's eyes and her father's strength, and she deserves to have her story told. I am recording it because the creatures who have become my family are not the monsters that legend makes them out to be, and someone needs to speak for them before it is too late. But I am also recording this as a warning. The forgetting is ending. The world is changing, shrinking, leaving fewer and fewer places where the old peoples can hide. Satellites peer down from the sky, mapping every square meter of wilderness. Drones fly over forests that have never seen human footprints. Climate change is pushing animals and people into new territories, disrupting patterns that have held stable for thousands of years. Sooner or later, someone else will stumble onto the truth. Someone else will see what I saw, learn what I learned, face the choice that I faced. When that happens, I hope they will remember what I have told them here. These creatures are not our enemies. They are our kin, separated from us by time and forgetting, but bound to us by blood that cannot be denied. They have watched over us from the shadows for longer than our civilizations have existed. They have protected us in ways we never knew, kept balances we never understood, maintained connections that we severed without ever realizing what we were losing. They are dying now, fading away like morning mist, and when they are gone, something irreplaceable will have been lost from the world. But it doesn't have to be that way. The child that Elena bore, the child I have helped raise for the past 3 years, is proof that the old bonds can be restored. She walks in both worlds, speaks both languages, carries both bloodlines in her veins. She is the future that both our peoples need, the bridge that can span the gulf between us. She is not the only one. There are others like her, scattered across the world, children of unions that should have been impossible, living proof that the boundary between human and other is not as firm as we like to believe. Most of them don't know what they are. Most of them have never seen the creatures who share their blood, never learned the truth about their heritage, never understood why they feel so different from the people around them. But they are out there, and someday, when the time is right, they will find their way home. I am writing this from a place I cannot name, in a chamber deep beneath the earth, where the light comes from sources I still don't fully understand. Elena is beside me, watching our daughter play with the young ones of the tribe, her laughter echoing off the stone walls in a way that makes my chest ache with something I can only call joy. The elder sits nearby, its ancient eyes tracking the children's movements with an expression that might be hope, or might be sorrow, or might be some emotion that humans don't have a word for. 3 years. It feels like a lifetime. It feels like no time at all. I have changed in ways I never expected. My body has grown harder, leaner, adapted to the cold and the darkness, and the demands of a life lived outside the boundaries of human civilization. My senses have sharpened. I can hear things now that I never could before, smell changes in the weather days before they arrive, feel the vibrations of movement through solid rock. The creatures say this is normal, that humans who live among them long enough begin to remember abilities that were always there, buried beneath layers of civilization and forgetting. I don't know if I believe them, but I experience. My mind has changed, too. The categories I once used to organize the world, human and animal, natural and supernatural, possible and impossible, have dissolved like morning frost. I see things differently now. I understand things I never could have grasped before. The world is larger than I knew, stranger than I imagined, more full of wonder and terror than any science could capture. And I am more alone than I have ever been. That is the price of the choice I made. I have gained a new family, a new purpose, a new understanding of my place in the cosmos. But I have lost everything else. My career, my colleagues, my friends, my country. My mother died 2 years ago, and I learned about it only months later, when one of the creatures who still moves among humans brought word back to the tribe. I couldn't go to her funeral. I couldn't say goodbye. I couldn't even let her know, in her final days, that her son was still alive. Sometimes in the quiet hours before dawn, I wonder if I made the right choice. I wonder if the cost was too high, if the sacrifice was too great, if I gave up too much of myself in pursuit of something I didn't fully understand. I wonder if Yuri was right all along, if the only way to truly help these creatures was to bring evidence of their existence to the world, to force humanity to confront the truth and deal with the consequences. But then I watch Elena's daughter, our daughter, in every way that matters, running through the chambers with the young ones, her laughter mixing with their howls, her small body moving with a grace that belongs to neither species and both. I watch the elder teaching her the old songs, the ancient stories, the knowledge that has been passed down through 100 generations. I watch her growing into something new, something unprecedented, something that carries the hope of 2 peoples in her small, fierce heart. And I know that I made the only choice I could have made. The world is not ready for the truth. I understood that the moment I saw the creatures for the first time, standing at the edge of the firelight, with eyes that reflected something deeper than animal intelligence. Humanity is not prepared to learn that we share this planet with another people, a people who remember us from before we remembered ourselves, a people whose blood runs in our veins, whether we acknowledge it or not. The revelation would shatter too many certainties, overturn too many assumptions, force too many uncomfortable questions about what it means to be human. But the world is changing. The forgetting is ending. And someday, perhaps sooner than anyone expects, the truth will emerge, whether humanity is ready for it or not. When that day comes, I hope that people will remember what I have written here. I hope they will understand that the creatures they encounter are not monsters to be feared, or specimens to be studied, or threats to be eliminated. I hope they will see what I have seen, a people fighting for survival, reaching across the gulf of time and difference, hoping against hope that the connection which once bound us together can be restored. I hope they will choose understanding over fear. I hope they will choose connection over separation. I hope they will choose to remember what we have spent so long trying to forget. The child is calling for me now. She wants me to come see something she has found in one of the deeper chambers, a fossil, perhaps, or an unusual stone formation, or one of the countless wonders that fill this underground world. Her voice echoes through the passages, bright and eager, and full of the boundless curiosity that defines her. She is 3 years old, and she already speaks 3 languages: Russian, the creature's tongue, and something else, something older, a language of gestures and sounds and shared understanding that predates words entirely. She is the future. She is the bridge. She is the reason I gave up everything I had and descended into darkness and never looked back. I have to go to her now. But before I do, I want to say one more thing to whoever is reading this, whoever has followed my story to its end, whoever is sitting somewhere in the human world trying to decide whether to believe what I have told them. I know how this sounds. I know that every word I have written strains credulity, that the rational mind recoils from claims like the ones I have made, that the simplest explanation is that I am lying, or delusional, or both. I know that most people who encounter this account will dismiss it as fiction, as fantasy, as the ravings of a man who spent too long alone in the Siberian wilderness and lost his grip on reality. I can't prove otherwise. I have no evidence to offer, no photographs or samples or coordinates that would allow others to verify my claims. The creatures have made sure of that. They are not ready to be found, not yet, and they have taken steps to ensure that my account cannot be used to track them down. The cave entrances have been sealed. The camera traps have been destroyed. The only proof that remains is my word, and I know how little that is worth in a world that demands empirical verification for every claim. But I am telling the truth. I am telling the truth because I believe it matters, even if no one believes me. I am telling the truth because somewhere out there, someone is going to have an experience like mine, a glimpse of something that shouldn't exist, an encounter that defies explanation, a moment when the veil between worlds grows thin enough to see through. And when that happens, I want them to know that they are not alone. I want them to know that what they saw was real. I want them to know that there is more to this world than the narrow slice of reality that we have agreed to acknowledge. I am telling the truth because the creatures deserve to have their story told, even if the world is not ready to hear it. They have lived in shadow for too long, hidden and forgotten, and slowly dying while humanity spread across the earth like a plague. They deserve to be remembered. They deserve to be acknowledged. They deserve to have at least one human voice speaking on their behalf, bearing witness to their existence, insisting that they matter. And I am telling the truth because my daughter deserves to know where she came from. Someday, when she is old enough to understand, I will give her this account. I will tell her about her mother's courage and her father's sacrifice, and the ancient people who welcomed her into their family. I will tell her about the world above, the world of cities and machines, and billions of humans who have forgotten the old ways. I will tell her about the choice I made, and why I made it, and what I hope it will mean for her future. And I will tell her that she is loved. That is the most important thing, in the end. More important than science, or history, or the fate of species. More important than proof or evidence, or the opinions of people who will never understand. She is loved by her mother, and by me, and by the creatures who have become her family. She is loved, and that love will carry her through whatever challenges lie ahead, whatever choices she will have to make, whatever bridges she will have to build. The elder is standing in the doorway now, watching me with those ancient, patient eyes. It knows what I am doing. It knows that I am sending these words out into the world, casting them like seeds onto soil that may or may not be fertile. It has not tried to stop me. Perhaps it understands that some truths need to be spoken, even if no one is ready to hear them. Perhaps it knows that the forgetting cannot last forever, that someday the walls between our worlds will crumble, that the children of both peoples will have to find a way to live together. Or perhaps it simply trusts me, after all this time. Perhaps it knows that I would never do anything to endanger the family I have found here, the life I have built, the daughter I am raising. The child is calling again, more insistent now. I can hear her footsteps echoing through the passages, small and quick and full of impatient energy. She will be here soon, bursting into the chamber with whatever treasure she has discovered, demanding my attention and my admiration and my love. I have to go. But before I do, I want to leave you with one final thought, one final image to carry with you as you return to your world and your life and your comfortable certainties about the nature of reality. Picture a forest, vast and ancient and dark, stretching across a landscape that has never known human habitation. Picture the silence beneath the canopy, the shadows between the trees, the spaces where the light never reaches. Picture yourself standing at the edge of that forest, looking into the darkness, feeling the weight of something watching you from the depths. Now picture yourself taking a step forward. Picture yourself walking into the shadows, leaving behind everything you know, surrendering to the mystery that has called to you since before you were born. Picture yourself finding, at the end of that journey, not monsters but family, not horror but wonder, not death but a new kind of life. That is what I found. That is what awaits anyone brave enough to look past the fear and the forgetting and the comfortable lies we tell ourselves about the world. The forest is waiting. The creatures are watching. And somewhere, in the depths of the wilderness, a child is laughing. My name is Dmitry Volkov. I was a wildlife biologist. I was a scientist. I was a man who believed that the world could be understood through observation and measurement and rational analysis. I was wrong about so many things. But I was right about one thing, the only thing that matters in the end. We were never meant to be separate. The child has found me now. She is tugging at my hand, pulling me toward the passage, her eyes bright with excitement about whatever wonder she has discovered. Elena is smiling at us from across the chamber, her face soft with love, her hand resting on her stomach where a new life is beginning to grow. Another bridge, another hope, another chance. I am going now. I am going to follow my daughter into the darkness, into the depths, into the world that has become my home. I am not afraid. I have never been less afraid in my life. Goodbye.